The best of downtown from 7 to 8 a.m. on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket and 929theticket.com. This is the best of downtown.
Hey, good morning. Welcome into a Best of Downtown show for Sunday, the 27th day of July. Here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket and worldwide at 929theticket.com. I'm Rich Kimball here along with Brian Stackpole. From Seasons, Main Street in Bangor, our First Bank Studios, the first better way to bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender, previously recorded edition of the program. By the way, you can follow Downtown all the time on Twitter at Downtown Rich K, our Facebook page, Downtown with Rich Kimball. Got a big show for you this morning from the week that was, including much of our tribute to John Winkin, the longtime baseball coach at the University of Maine. Colby Husson died this week at the age of 94, and we remembered him with an array of guests, and we'll bring much of that your way this morning as well. We'll also talk Major League Baseball as we close in on the trading deadline next week. Sports Illustrated's Jay Jaffe with us, and Brian MacPherson of the Providence Journal talking Red Sox and their plans heading to the deadline. And some Patriots, too. Camp got underway. Bob Socci, the voice of the team, will join us later this morning on the Best of Downtown. We kick things off, though, with our remembrance of the late Dr. John Winkin. In studio early in the week, we were joined by one of John Winkin's closest friends, longtime Maine baseball broadcaster George Hale. He was with us, and Billy Swift, the former Black Bear, who had a terrific career in the major leagues with the Seattle Mariners, the San Francisco Giants, among others. Billy Swift called in and talked to George and I about his first meeting with John Winkin.
Well, the first time I met him was at a Legion tournament, and I was scared to death of the guy because, you know, he reminded me of my dad. He was at that leathery skin, that not big in stature, but very has that look about him. And I remember him coming up to me, talk to me at the state Legion tournament, and saying he'd like to have me come to Maine. I had a great tournament. I was like coming as an outfielder, you know, a slash pitcher, but you know, like I told everybody else, you know, Coach Winkin gave me the shot. I mean, if he doesn't come see me play, I don't go to Maine. I don't go to college probably, and I don't become a professional baseball player. I really owe it all to him for what he did for me to get me up to Maine and then really give me the opportunity to play there.
Well, we were just talking about him, and he was certainly an old-school kind of baseball coach who expected the most from his players, but also got the most out of his guys, too.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt. I think our class with Lacanada, Lashua, you know, Eddie Hackett, Jeff Paul, the group of guys that came in there were just good, hard-nosed Maine baseball guys. Love the game of baseball, and I think Coach Winkin knew that and really and took that group that we had and really made it a special group for us. I think we're all in contact with each other all the time, always talking. Just a great group of friends that were developed under him while we were there, and that I appreciate that more than anything.
I can remember the first time John Winkin mentioned Billy Swift to me. He didn't talk to me about how you could pitch. He said, "I got a hitter coming in here." He said, "Going to."
I know.
He said that guy he knocks the cover off the ball. I said, "Great, we got to have some of that." He never mentioned pitching to me.
I know, isn't that funny? And I tell the guys I coach now, the guys that want to be two-way players that are, you know, played outfield, play infield when they're in high school and pitched. And I said, "Listen, I'm going to give you guys every opportunity because my coach did." You know, I went to Maine as an outfielder, and pitching just kind of blossomed probably my sophomore year. And, you know, I give all the guys the same opportunity here where I coach to do that and let them figure out what they think they want to do to get to that next level. And he gave me that chance. You know, and even that hitting that I had in college really carried over when I got to the National League. I really never forgot all the stuff I learned at Maine, and I ended up being a pretty good National League hitter when I was over there.
We're talking with Bill Swift, now the head coach of the Firestorm at Arizona Christian. What have you learned, and what did you take into the coaching ranks that you learned from Coach Winkin? And do you hear yourself saying some of the things that he ever said to you?
Well, most of it's the fundamental stuff. I think taking it down to the basis for whether it's throwing, hitting, you know, starting on your knees, working your way up on a chair, and I still do all that stuff. I don't have to worry about the indoor practice here because we're, you know, it's 115 every day here, it seems like, right now. But, you know, the way he ran the practices indoors, and I just incorporate all of the stuff that he taught, and I still use his book, the Coaching Bible, you know, the lessons that he taught, the way he set the pitchers up for the winter, what we're going to do. I use all that stuff. And it's just a great foundation, and I think that's what made us good ball players, is we were very fundamentally sound all around, defensively, offensively, pitching, catching. We just had guys that really learned it from the get-go, from what he taught us, and that's what I use today to teach my guys.
Well, he's certainly, we said, larger than life, and I assume, like everybody else, wherever you went in the country in your professional career, you mentioned Maine, people would bring up the name of John Winkin.
Oh, always. He was an icon. I mean, the times we went down to Miami or to Texas or to California, and obviously the College World Series, Maine was starting to be quite noticed. That everybody knew Winkin. Everybody knew that name. They knew Wink. They knew Coach Winkin. Obviously with his Hall of Fame induction everywhere, he was well liked by all the coaches in the country, and there's no reason why not to, because he loved the game. He dedicated himself to the game and his players and to the state of Maine. That's why he was such a great coach. He just he had that impact, and he had that impact on all of us. I mean, every one of us. You want that respect where everybody calls you coach. I mean, that's the respect I'm trying to get from my players. That's what he did for us, and his name is just, you mentioned Coach Winkin, everybody knows who he is.
John Winkin was great with players. They loved to pull tricks on him. We were talking about that today, Billy. I'm sure there was some of you remember too. And that was a mark of respect, whether it was trying to sneak some chewing gum under. He hated chewing gum in the dugout. You remember that, Billy?
No, isn't that funny?
He hated. You couldn't chew gum in the dugout. And I can't remember who it was, but Alan Hackett and I were talking about it today. They chewed up a whole bunch of gum, and they waited all game until Winkin would lift his shoe. And when he lifted his shoe, they put it so when he brought his spikes back down, and they waited for the scream, and it didn't take long. Winkin gave
isn't that crazy? He had, and that was the good thing, is that, if you did pull a joke on him, he wasn't one of those coaches that was going to freak out. I think he just liked the camaraderie of the players. I think he liked the fact that we were a team. We played together. We slept together. We did things off the field together. And that's what you want out of a team, is those guys to fight and scratch for each other when you're off and on the field. And that's the type of guys that he brought to Maine, was those type of guys. And could take a joke. He loved his chocolate ice cream. We would always make jokes about that. Driving down the road, we were going to stop and we'd pull off, and we knew it was going to be closed. And he'd go, "Oh gosh, and we pull off. We knew everything was closed, but just tease him with chocolate ice cream, and that's the type of guy he was. He's very, very approachable. That's the big thing. Even though he's a hard-nosed coach, he's got that look about him, but very approachable, and that's what you want in a coach. You want a guy that you can talk to about anything. And he was that type of coach.
And that was George Hale and Billy Swift talking about John Winkin, who passed away a week ago today, remembering the great University of Maine and Husson University baseball coach. You're listening to the Best of Downtown here for the 27th day of July 2014. Glad to have you alongside on this early morning edition of the program. Still a lot more to come, including Steve Buckley and Gary Thorne's reminiscence of Coach Winkin as well. We'll hear from play-by-play voice of the New England Patriots, Bob Socci, Brian MacPherson talking the Red Sox, and after this quick break, we'll hear from Jay Jaffe of Sports Illustrated talking on the MLB and Bartolo Colon. That coming up and much more here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket, the best of downtown.
Your best of downtown Sunday morning, Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Rich Kimball with Brian Stackpole. Major League Baseball's trading deadline coming up this Thursday. We talked with Jay Jaffe of Sports Illustrated on this past Thursday about who the definite sellers are as we approach the trade deadline.
Well, I think you in the NL in the NL you've got some clear separation, particularly in the NL West. The Padres, the Diamondbacks, and the Rockies are guys who teams that are out of it, as are the Cubs and Phillies, and maybe to a lesser extent the Marlins and Mets. I think any of those teams could wind up peeling off players. We've already seen the Diamondbacks and the Padres do that some, and of course the Cubs made that big deal with trading Jeff Samardzija and Jason Hamill a few weeks ago. But I think there's a lot to be had on Philadelphia. I expect Jonathan Papelbon to be moved. I wouldn't be surprised if Jimmy Rollins or maybe some other guys there, some lesser guys there, get traded as well. But just about all those teams have at least one player who appeals to the contenders. In the AL, it's the Rangers and Astros, the Twins and White Sox are the ones that are clearly out of it, and we're starting to see some player movement there. Meanwhile, we've got some teams on the fence, particularly the Rays and Royals. Royals are right at 500. The Rays are 4 games under, but they're arguably the hottest team in baseball over the last month. The Red Sox, defending champions, are also below 500. It's not really clear exactly what they're going to do there.
Yeah, well, we had some hopes here a few days ago when they had a 5-game winning streak, 8 out of 9. It looked like there was a chance to gain some ground, but after losing again today, they dropped 3 out of 4 to Toronto. And then Larry Lucchino today making the announcement that the team is going to hold off on any negotiations with John Lester until the season is over. You have to feel that if this thing gets to free agency, it'll be hard for the Red Sox to match up with offers that might come in from other teams.
Well, it feels like they've lowballed Lester, but I do think the fact that they're going to have an exclusive window to negotiate with him at the end of the season, that it may be that may be the point where they get something done. I expect that they'll hold on to him just so they can preserve those lines of communication rather than trading him, where he'd probably be he'd easily be one of the best pitchers on the market, possibly the best to move if the Rays don't trade David Price.
So for those teams that are buying next week, who are a couple of the most attractive targets out there who could be available?
Well, obviously Price is the prize, but it remains to be seen as to whether he's dealt. I think that really is kind of colors the rest of the market here. Elsewhere, I think that likewise Cliff Lee's probably not going to move. I do think we'll see Jake Peavy as one, which isn't saying nearly as much. Ian Kennedy is probably going to be on the move. With regards to hitters, I think we're looking mostly at supplemental pieces rather than mid-lineup guys, although Marlon Byrd's a name you certainly hear a lot about as a corner bat. I know the Royals are a team that's interested in him. But I think we're going to see a lot of low-impact moves, a lot of relievers moving around.
When you look at some of the advanced metrics today and gauge the value of current players, obviously we're seeing a real disappearance of power hitters around the league, a tremendous rise in the number of strikeouts. What does that do to the overall value of those guys that do have a little pop?
Well, I think it raises it. I mean, wins above replacement is sensitive to the scoring context. It's all about the scoring context. So a guy who's able to put up big numbers when scoring levels are down, like, say, Mike Trout, is going to accumulate more value relative to his peers from other eras. So Trout's, for example, well on his way to Cooperstown, and we've got a whole lot of players who are, I think.
And that was Jay Jaffe of Sports Illustrated talking about the Hall of Fame inductions and also who might be dealt come the trade deadline, which will come up in just a couple short days. This is the Best of Downtown, a previously recorded edition of the program here on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. We'll take another break and we'll continue our John Winkin conversation as we'll talk with Steve Buckley and Gary Thorne as they reminisce on the great baseball coach here in the state of Maine. That and much more still to come here on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket and the Best of Downtown.
We're on the Best of Downtown, a previously recorded edition of the program on this Sunday morning. Sports Radio, 92.9 The Ticket, 92.9theticket.com. We continue to look back at our tribute to the late Dr. John Winkin. Back on Monday, we saluted Coach Winkin with a wide array of guests, including the Boston Herald's Steve Buckley, who got to know John Winkin when he covered the team for the Portland Press-Herald back in the early 80s. Steve Buckley joined us to talk about Dr. John Winkin.
Yeah, it was incredible. I had the good fortune of covering the Black Bears for the Press-Herald in 82 and 83. In both years, they went to the College World Series. And I think it was in 82, they beat Cal State Fullerton and Stanford. And they for a little bit here and there, they might have won the whole thing. And the next year, they lost, I think, 5-4 to Michigan. Chris Sable hit a home run off of Billy Swift. And those 2 seasons, they had teams good enough to win the College World Series. And as I just wrote in a column, it's going to go in tomorrow's paper. If you look at that particular team in '82, the catcher was Ed Hackett. He was from, I think, Orono. Kevin Burney at first base from Oxford Hills High School. Mark Sutton from Augusta was the second baseman. Pete Adams from Portland was the shortstop. Jeff Paul from Orono was the third baseman. Center field Rick Lashlor was from, I think, Auburn. Right field Tommy Venetestein, I think he was from Bangor.
Mm-hmm.
And the starting pitchers, the top 3 pitchers, are Billy Swift from South Portland, Ernie Webster from Westbrook, and Stulak Ignata, a big tall kid with a great curveball, was from Portland High. And so he took a bunch of kids from Maine, and it wasn't like he was going out to Florida and Alabama to get these players. These are all kids from Maine.
And John Winkin, as you know, he was as focused on baseball as anybody. I don't know that I've ever met anyone as single-minded. If it wasn't baseball, he wasn't all that interested in it.
Yeah, there were a lot of funny stories. There's the I don't know if it's an urban legend or not, that on the way to his wedding, he had the earpiece in, he was listening to a Red Sox game and leaned over and said Ted Williams just put one out or something like that. There are all these great stories. And I also remember John Winkin coming to it. I was covering, this was back when I was at the Press Herald again, and I told him he should go check out a kid from Wells High School that was a pretty good player that wanted to play in Maine, and here I was playing amateur scout. So I happened to be at the Legion game that Wink went to, and before the game even started, Wink showed up, as he promised he would, and before the game even started, Wink was getting into his car, and I said, "You haven't even seen this kid play yet?" And Wink said, "No, I saw him take infield, and he can't play for me." And Wink certainly had an eye for talent. And who was I to judge, given the amount of talent that he brought up to Orono over the years?
And he seemingly knew everybody in baseball, not just college baseball, but in the pros. His network of contacts was legendary, and his reputation spread far beyond the Maine border.
Oh, no. I mean, it was really amazing. I always say that Wink kind of invented the art of indoor practice, which was, of course, important given the weather up in Orono. And he would drill those kids. They would get off the plane, go to Marklight Stadium, and get annihilated by the Hurricanes that first day, and then the second day they'd win. And throughout college baseball, this caught on. And I would like to know, I don't know if anyone's ever done a scholarship on this one. I often wonder if there were any big powerhouse teams in the Sun Belt that ever recruited John Winkin, figuring if he could put together winning teams up in Orono, Maine, what could he do down south with those big stadiums and all the scholarships and the warm weather and all that. I would like to know the true story about that.
Well, and of course, Winkin would often talk about the fact that when there would be a rules question, he would say to umpires, "I wrote the rule book." And he wasn't exaggerating about that. He was very active even after his retirement at Maine, and when he moved on to Husson, he would go off to the College World Series or a regional tournament and was always there as a representative of the NCAA. Nobody knew the rules any better than Winkin did.
Yeah, another thing I always liked about Wink was that whenever they won a big tournament game, like they'd get out of McCoy and play in the Eastern Regionals, and then they'd play that was the ECAC tournament, and then they'd have the Northeast Regional, which I think was in Orono a couple of years. And whenever they won a regional tournament to get to the next round, the players would do the pig pile at home plate and jump up and down. Wink would be standing by himself in the dugout or on the bench, filling out his scorecard, because he kept score, you may remember. He kept his own scorebook. And I asked him, I said, "Why aren't you out there with your players?" And he said, "My job is to put them on the field. When they win, that's their moment." And I always kind of like that. That is something, if I ever coach, that's something I think I'd like to incorporate into my own regiment. Not that I'd ever be a coach, but I like to think I'd do it that way also.
Steve Buckley and his reminiscences of former Maine baseball coach John Winkin. Another guy who got to know Wink very well in his time at Maine, Gary Thorne, now the voice of the Baltimore Orioles. He knew John Winkin extremely well, worked with him for a number of years, and we asked him if he had met a more single-minded person than Dr. John.
Boy, I'd have to think long and hard. I think I probably have, and I say that as an attribute to John. There aren't many, but there are people whose entire lives are wrapped up in the game and who just love it so much in every aspect of it that they virtually spend every waking minute, and probably sleeping moment too, thinking about the game and about the players and about its history and its future and a lot regarding talent. I mean, John he was a great evaluator of talent. One of the things I loved doing, I did ESPN regional College World Series, and John was often assigned by the NCAA to be the representative and the one in charge of the tournament at given sites. And I did a couple. I remember we did one in Alabama and did one in Georgia, and John was there as the NCAA guy in charge. And honest to God, I'd get scouting reports on the teams that were involved from John on virtually every player. And he wasn't even there as a coach or anything. He was there running the tournament. But he would know all the teams. He would know the players involved. Watch this guy's curve. Watch the range at short. Watch his arm at third. And, all of that kind of stuff. Because John loved that. He genuinely enjoyed that part of the game and seeing and discussing the attributes of players. And boy, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody much better than John was at that.
And he just, as you say, loved the game of baseball at all levels. He didn't mind. He was more than happy to go to a Little League clinic, work with kids in T-ball. He would go to high school camps. I worked for him doing his own camp, and he was probably in his early 70s at the time. And you know how those camps work. The head coach usually comes out on day one and greets the parents, and then comes out on the last day and thanks them for coming and sending them money. But not Wink. He was out there usually with his shirt off, going around working with kids individually at a point where he didn't need to do it, but he did it because he loved the game so much.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, that's what he lived for. God love him. I mean, we all should be so fortunate to be doing something that we love so much that, it's never going to work, and it's never something we're trying to get away from, and you continue to enjoy it for that extended period of time, in his case, your entire life. I mean, that's a pretty damn good way to go through this world, and that's what he did. And absolutely, he would never have thought about not being out there working with the kids and helping them. I mean, that wouldn't have even crossed his mind. He won for them and two for himself. I mean, what better thing was he going to do on any given day than go out there and help kids learn how to play the game? I mean, I think that's what he was all about. And Maine was so lucky to have somebody like that to put their program together and to have the success that they did. I mean, that doesn't happen if you don't have somebody like John who has that kind of dedication to the game and to the program.
He's such a legend in the eyes of everybody now, and deservedly so. But people forget, and maybe just aren't old enough to remember, that this was not an easy situation to walk into, because he was replacing a legend at Maine as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jack Butterfield had put a program together where nobody thought one could exist, and Jack was very much like John as far as being completely dedicated to the game. I mean, when I was at Maine playing freshman ball, I played for Bill Livesey, who was a freshman coach, but Butterfield was involved in all phases of both the varsity and the JV team. So I had a year before he left, and I mean, it wasn't easy. The recruiting part of it was just astronomical. I mean, trying to get people to come to play baseball at Maine because of the weather situation was very hard to do, and you had to create a winning situation the kids would want to come to, and that's what Jack did, what Butterfield did, and that's what John continued and heightened even when he took the program over. But that would never go away. I mean, the problem of getting kids to come to play there, especially from outside the state, is always going to be an enormous task for anybody that's handling that program. And John put that on the map and made a winner out of it, and kids wanted to come to play because, hey, we got a chance to go to the College World Series. We're going to be playing under a coach who knows everybody when it comes to our future contacts that we'll have in the game. And that's what you had to do. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't automatic in any sense of the word.
His spirit was so strong, even at the end of his life. He had that massive stroke that probably would have killed a lot of people that weren't in such good shape going in. And he hung around for a long time and stayed strong right to the very end. And I know you were working with him, I think, at one of his very last public appearances. Can you tell the story of John Winkin going on microphone and just watching the transformation that took place when he got that mic in his hand?
Yeah, there was the big reception for him at the University of Maine one night. My God, how many years was that, Rich? How many years ago?
That was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago?
It had to be, at least that, if not more. And everybody came, former players, coaches, university officials, friends, family. I mean, everybody was there, and they asked me to MC that, and I was just, so honored to do that. And at the end, I asked John, I said, look, when we get done with this, if you don't want to say anything, everybody will understand. No, I want to talk. And so when he got done, it's one of those where you don't ask a question, you just hand over the mic and say, John, anything you'd like to say? And John was adamant about not dying. I mean, he was coming out of that chair that he was in because he couldn't walk at the time after the stroke. And I'm not going to give in. I'm not going to die. I got things left to do. And he went, he had the place, he had the roof coming off the place with the people just standing up and cheering and roaring and clapping. And he meant it. And you know something? He did.
Yeah.
He lasted not only through the stroke, but all these years after, because he just had that fire for life in him that he refused to let go out. And, we should all be so lucky.
And that was Gary Thorne and Steve Buckley both talking on John Winkin in his passing a week ago today. This is the Best of Downtown for the 27th day of July 2014. Again, very happy to have you alongside for this early morning edition of the program. We'll take another break here on the program, but when we come back, we'll talk to the voice of the New England Patriots, Bob Socci, to give us a little preview before the start of training camp with those New England Patriots. That and much more coming up here on the Best of Downtown, Sports Radio 92.9.
But I refuse to let you go if I have to beg, please.
Well, football season is here. At least training camp's open this week. Patriots got together and opened up preseason practices. And on opening day, we were joined by the voice of the Patriots, Bob Socci from the 98.5 Sports Hub, Patriots Radio Network. And we asked Bob what the Patriots can learn at training camp.
Well, there still are a lot of questions, I think, as good potentially, for example, as people envision the Patriots defense being. There are still questions with regards to, number one, the veterans who are coming off injury. What will Vince Wilfork look like when the season rolls around in September in terms of his agility coming off the torn Achilles from a year ago, now north of 30? Will Tommy Kelly be able to come back from his knee injury suffered a year ago and really play as well as he did for the Patriots in the first handful of games? What about Gerard Mayo coming off the season-ending injury from last year? Then there are questions with regards to personnel. How dearly will the Patriots miss Brandon Browner for those first 4 games when he's suspended? And what will he give them when he returns? Will Deron Harmon be the guy at strong safety next to Devin McCourty, or will there be someone else? Can they mount an adequate pass rush outside of Chandler Jones and Rob Ninkovich to give those guys a bit of a breather? And along those lines, will a veteran like Will Smith, the former Saint coming off a knee injury, be able to respond in terms of his health? And the same goes for a veteran guy like James Anderson, who was brought in as a free agent. Can he be the coverage linebacker the Patriots could use on third down? And then on the other side of the ball, there are certainly some heated competitions on the offensive line, I think in particular at center and right guard. And then there's the question that popped up last year repeatedly. Who will be Tom Brady's reliable wide receivers? What guys in particular in their second year can make the jump for Brady at that position? I know a lot of people wonder about the absence of LeGarrette Blount and picking up the slack in the running game, but I'm pretty confident that the Patriots will be able to do that without much difficulty this year.
Yeah, at the running back spot, despite the troubles that he had protecting the ball last year, Stephen Ridley's still their number one guy?
Yeah, I think so, without question. If he holds on to the ball, he is clearly the best running back they have. Shane Breen's the best pass-catching back they have. But with Ridley, it does come down to fumbles. He's fumbled 8 times the last 2 years. Last season he lost all 4 fumbles, and 2 of them were returned for touchdowns. All 4 of them led to scores. But he's the most dynamic of the backs. He's a guy who runs hard. He's one of those guys who can make one cut and then accelerate through a hole if it's there. And he's rushed for more than 2,000 yards combined the last 2 seasons. And although Blount last year, of course, finished on such a strong note, Ridley did outdistance him, albeit by 1 yard. Nonetheless, Ridley was the leading rusher for the second straight season.
We're talking.
That said, that I was just going to take quickly too. That said, they've got some young backs who really are vying for spots on the roster, and I think stand a legitimate chance to make the team.
Talking with Bob Socci from the 98.5 Sports Hub Patriots Radio Network. Preseason camp open today for the Patriots. They'll actually be out on the field tomorrow. There was so much talk in the offseason about Tom Brady, where he stands among the quarterbacks of the league. But the reality is despite the fact that the numbers were down, he didn't have a lot of guys to throw to last year. Have you seen any great erosion in Tom Brady?
Well, granted, I've only watched him in person on an every-game basis one season. But, to these eyes, I don't see much, if any, decline whatsoever in Tom Brady's performance, not only last year, but over the course of his career. I mean, I think you hit it on the head, number one, last year. There was a constant rotation of personnel, number one. So he was passing to a lot of changing parts. And then you had a lot of those guys who were coming into the league trying to make an impact in their first year, like Ken Tompkins, Josh Boyd, to a greater extent than Boyd, Aaron Dobson. And wide receiver is probably the most difficult position for a young player to succeed in his first season. And I think we saw that last year, the inconsistency of that group, when it came to timing, when it came to being in the right place at the right time for Brady, when it came to simply getting off the line of scrimmage and dealing with pass coverages at the NFL level. Then you had a guy like Danny Amendola, who, of course, was lost early to the year with injury. Shane Breen, the best pass-catching back, was lost for 8 games. And Rob Gronkowski, a difference-maker at tight end, played in only 6.5 of the 16 games a year ago. And when you look at the numbers for Brady when Gronk was in the lineup, it's incredible what the Patriots were able to do. They were able to average over 30 points a game. And Gronkowski, really, with Brady, I think, they had a stretch of games last year, really started with that Pittsburgh win when the Patriots scored 55 points, when Tom Brady was clearly as good as he's ever been.
Of course, Rex Ryan this week making some news saying that the Patriots need to be worried about him, but realistically, is there much of any challenge to the Patriots in the division this season?
Well, it's funny, Rich, because I know the AFC East, in most cases, I think it's fair criticism. It's definitely, if not the most maligned, because that would suggest that it's unfair criticism. It is certainly the most, if not one of the 2 or 3 most ridiculed divisions in the NFL. And yet, when I look back at what the Patriots did last year, they went 4-2 in the division, and they really struggled in some of those wins to beat the Buffalo Bills, to beat the New York Jets the first 2 weeks of the year. They certainly had their hands full with Miami and Foxborough before the Dolphins beat them in South Florida. We know, of course, the Jets were able to beat them in overtime in the Meadowlands. So, when I look at the numbers from a year ago, and then traditionally, the AFC East has not necessarily been the cakewalk that it's been, that it's perceived to be. For the Patriots, there's still divisional opponents that know one another extremely well. When you talk about the Jets, it is an outstanding defense, and they should be improved on offense. Now, how much will Geno Smith be improved at quarterback, and will he stay in that position, or will Michael Vick eventually be the guy there? That's a huge question, but I think there's a lot of potential for Rex Ryan's team because of the Jets' defense. Buffalo certainly made bold strides with its trade up in the draft and selecting Sammy Watkins, and there's a lot of talent on that team. It's a pretty deep group of wide receivers, some of them very young. And on the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot of talent, in particular at defensive line for the Buffalo Bills. Again, it comes down to a young quarterback. And as far as Miami's concerned, they right now seem to be a mess once again as the year gets started, especially on offense. But when you look at the defense on paper, it's a strong defensive unit, you'd have to think. And considering that the Patriots open in South Florida the first week of September, that will be no easy contest for the New England Patriots by any stretch. So I think it's a tough set of circumstances, as dominant as the Patriots have been within the division. When you start to break things down individually and look at the histories of the rivalries in that division, Buffalo's created some problems for the Pats in recent years. We know the Jets have, and Miami certainly in South Florida especially has done so.
Bob Socci, the voice of the New England Patriots, joining Downtown last Wednesday to talk about the New England Patriots and the beginning of training camp, which started officially last Thursday. This is the Best of Downtown here for July 27th, 2014. Very happy to have you alongside here on this edition of the program. We'll be taking you all the way up until the top of the hour. And after this break, we'll hear from one of our favorites from the Providence Journal. It's Brian MacPherson. He'll talk a little Red Sox, talk about who might be dealt before the trade deadline coming up on the 31st. That and much more still to come here on the Best of Downtown Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.
Back on the Best of Downtown, your Sunday. Rich Kimball, Brian Stackpole, 92.9 The Ticket, and 929theticket.com. Tomorrow, a live show, 4 p.m., and some good stuff for you. We'll talk baseball, of course, including some baseball music. Scott McCoy of a band called The Baseball Project will join us and talk about their brand new album. The album made up mostly of the guys who were in REM, pretty much everybody except Michael Stipe. They do some great songs about baseball. If you love baseball, it's good stuff. If you don't, it's just great music. Scott McCoy from the Baseball Project tomorrow on Downtown. Latest on the Sox, the Patriots as well. Movie reviews from Alan Adams of The Main Edge. The Sox. Stack, we had a moment there early in the week. The winning streak got to 5. Sox had won 8 of 9. Starting to feel good about things, although you kept it in perspective and said, no. They're just going to break our hearts. Don't get too excited.
I'm glad they started to tank right before the deadline, too. Yes. I was afraid it would happen after the deadline, but they helped us out a little bit.
Absolutely. And so now, clearly, the Red Sox go into the trade deadline as sellers. We talked about that and the future of this team with the Providence Journal's Brian MacPherson on Friday afternoon.
Yeah, it really it's make a run right now and see if you can sign him right now. Basically, if the Red Sox are willing to meet his price, meet it right now. If you're not going to meet it, then trade him and get something for him, because you're going to get something really good for him if you trade him. He's having a tremendous year. His playoff pedigree is clearly outstanding. Somebody's going to give up a premium young player. And if the Red Sox aren't going to meet Lester's price right now, just like if the Red Sox weren't meeting his price in spring training, who says they're going to meet his price once it gets to free agency, once other teams get involved in the bidding? That doesn't make any sense. So either they're going to go to, say, 5 years, 120, 6 years, 130, whatever it happens to be, or they're not going to sign him, because by the time he gets to free agency, it's going to go past those numbers, and the Red Sox aren't going to go there. That's just bad business to overpay in free agency if you weren't willing to pay him in spring training. So it seems like it's gotten to the point they're not going to get to his number, and if that's the case, then it does make sense to trade him and cash in that asset and get something really good back.
Also, some reports that the PV to St. Louis deal is not completely dead. Who are the other guys most likely to at least come up in discussions over the next 6 days?
Basically, anybody with a contract expiring after this year is going to come up in discussions. We've heard a lot about Andrew Miller. That sort of depends if the Red Sox feel like they can sign him long-term or not. Koji Uehara will be the same way, though he might be a candidate for the qualifying offer after this season just to bring him back for one more year. Johnny Gomes is an easy trade candidate just because you could really see him helping somebody as a right-handed bat to hit left-handed pitching. He's a really good pinch hitter, all those things, veteran, playoff experience. I think he's a guy that could really help somebody as well. Those I would say would be the big names on the block right now.
Are they looking for anything specific in terms of needs for the future, or are they just trying to stockpile young talent?
I think usually when you do this, you stockpile young talent. Certainly getting another AAA pitcher doesn't necessarily help them as much as it would somebody else, because that's where their area of depth is. I'm sure they're probably looking for bats, probably power bats. The problem is the power bats are difficult to come by because they're so rare. Teams are going to hold on to them. So I think that's the preference. But barring that, you get the best. It's sort of like the draft in some ways. You're going to trade a Johnny Gomes. You get the best player you can get, and then you figure the rest out later.
We're talking with Brian MacPherson of the Providence Journal, Red Sox, and the Tampa Bay Rays tonight. Speaking of young pitching, you wrote a column yesterday about Ruby De La Rosa, who's putting it together, and it's not just having the talent, but as you write, it's figuring out pitch selection and how to mix things up to be successful at the major league level.
Yeah, and then it's commanding it, too. Yesterday against Toronto, he just didn't have command of his fastball. And when that happens, basically the only pitch he has left is his changeup, and the Blue Jays were sitting on the changeup. It's challenging because his fastball and changeup have similar movement, too. So either he's got to keep them off balance with the timing, or he's got to work in the third pitch. There's some work to do with De La Rosa. He has a slider. He's worked on a curveball as well in AAA, but yesterday he was mostly fastball changeup, and the fastball wasn't very good. So the fastball command is a big thing, and then not relying too heavily on the changeup. That's the pitch mix. That's the not getting too predictable, falling into a pattern that's easily detectable on a scouting report. That's part of learning to pitch in the major leagues. They've been trying to get that through to him, but he can mix as much as he wants. If he doesn't command the fastball like he did yesterday, then it's not really going to matter, what his plan is, what his pitch mix is.
Yesterday, the Sox added injury to insult, if you will, the one hitter, and then late in the game, David Ortiz coming up with some back spasms. We were hoping to see him face David Price tonight. Any news today on Ortiz?
No, not yet. We haven't seen the lineup yet. It'll be, you're right, it's the fact that Price is pitching tonight. I mean, I wonder if they might have held him out anyway, just because there's no reason to get him back in the lineup right away. And given these games are starting to mean less and less, and giving him a day makes sense. And maybe John Farrell says, look, we don't need the sideshow of Price and Ortiz, so maybe he holds him out intentionally. You know, obviously, much to the disappointment of everyone who is looking forward to that sort of confrontation.
Well, with all eyes on the future now, we start to focus on some of the young guys. And you wrote about Xander Bogaerts' struggles defensively yesterday. Well documented what's happened with his batting average and his ability, especially to hit with men on base since the position switch. But he hasn't exactly been a gold glover over at third either.
Yeah, and the problem has been less the fielding than the throwing, which is sort of encouraging in a way because that's something he hasn't done. It's a different throw. It's different timing. You know, he finds himself in a different position with the ball. He short-hopped Mike Napoli a couple of times. And the day before, he also kind of hesitated. He wasn't sure where to go with the ball, whether to go home, whether to go to first, and he ended up not making any play. I think those are things you can learn. He's worked a lot with Brian Butterfield this year. He's still 21. Those are things you can learn. You know, the first step quickness probably still isn't what you want it to be. He's not going to be a gold glove defensive infielder necessarily, but they need him to be better than he's been so far if he's going to stay in the infield. But given his youth and given the work that he's putting in, I think they're still optimistic he can do that.
Will Middlebrooks has had a couple of homers recently in his rehab stint. How long before we see him back in Boston?
I guess that reminds me of one name I forgot on the trade block list is Stephen Drew, because really you're not going to bring back Will Middlebrooks until you have somewhere to play him, and the only real place to play him is by moving Bogaerts back to shortstop and playing Middlebrooks at third base. So I think, you know, by the end of this week, probably you've seen Stephen Drew traded because, again, he's a guy that is very useful on a contending team, but they're not a contending team, and he's hit enough lately where I think he's generated some value for himself. The defense was always there, and the offense is coming around. He's looking more like he did last year, and I think that's going to convince somebody he can help them. And when that happens, Middlebrooks comes back up. Yeah, I think they really could use these next 2 months to figure out what they have in Middlebrooks. You know, unless somebody really believes in Middlebrooks now, and maybe he's the one that gets traded. I don't think you rule that out as a possibility. I just don't think it's the more likely one.
And that was Brian MacPherson of the Providence Journal talking a little Red Sox baseball after a great start to the second half, kind of slowed down a little bit towards the end of the Toronto Blue Jays series. Looks like they're definitely going to be sellers at the deadline, but to what extent will they sell? Thanks for Brian for his thoughts and opinions on what the Sox may do when the 31st rolls around, which is just a couple short days from now, and we'll definitely see and wait with bated breath to see what the Sox ultimately end up doing. Well, this is the best of downtown here for the 27th day of July 2014. We'll take one final break, and when we come back on the other side of that break, we'll tell you what's to come for Downtown with Rich Kimball, weekdays from 4 to 6 p.m. right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket, including a jammed-packed Monday edition. That and much more still to come here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.
Getting set to wrap up the best of downtown for your Sunday morning, July number 27.
I guess you wonder where I've been.
Thanks to everybody on the program today. Billy Swift, George Hale, Gary Thorne, Steve Buckley of the Boston Herald, Jay Jaffe from Sports Illustrated, Patriots broadcaster Bob Socci, and Brian MacPherson of the Providence Journal. Had a lot of fun bringing you the best of the week here on the Best of Downtown. Don't forget, coming up tomorrow, Dale Duff, Clem Labrie, get your morning started with the morning pitch at 6 a.m. We've got some live radio tomorrow afternoon at 4. If all goes well, we'll be here for Downtown. Scott McCoy, the Baseball Project, latest on the Sox, the Patriots as well. Alan Adams of the Main Edge with movie reviews, and Steve McKay's weather for the week coming up as well. Baseball Hall of Fame inductions later on today. Something to look forward to today for baseball fans. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Enjoy yourself. And we will see you tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock right here on Downtown. You're listening to Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.
Don't hang around and let your problems surround you. There are movie shows downtown.